As our news feeds flip between missile alerts and moments of triumph, we find ourselves, as we so often do, reaching for Tehillim. But have you ever wondered what makes Tehillim so special? We've all been told that they're holy, that they have some kind of unique power, that they were written with divine inspiration. But why? What is it about these words that has made them a cornerstone of Judaism for thousands of years? That's the question the podcast Tehillim Unveiled sets out to answer. Each episode takes one of the most familiar chapters and unpeels it layer by layer to reveal its beauty, structure, emotions, and timeless meaning. If you're looking for a good place to start, check out their episode on Tehillim 20, Kaf, which is especially relevant right now. Tehillim Unveiled. The link is in the description of this podcast.
Journalistic integrity is the ability to look at things and see the complexity. It's not always black and white. It's not always a zero-sum game. It's not always 1 or 0. It can be he's made mistakes. He's a faulty guy. He's flawed. He should leave office even. I have no problem saying that. But I look at what's happened, like you said, Scott, over the last 10 days. And I say, wow, thank God that we had Netanyahu here to lead us through this period. They might contradict one another, but that's the complexity of being a Jewish person.
I'm Scott Kahn, and this is the Orthodox Conundrum. This is the Orthodox Conundrum on JewishCoffeehouse.com. I'm Scott Kahn. Once again, a major news story, this one about American strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities, has made it impossible for me to talk about anything else. I anticipate that the Orthodox Conundrum will resume discussing other issues relevant to the Jewish world in general and the Orthodox community in particular in our next episode. But today, the news is so momentous that I wanted to share analysis from a real expert, from the former editor of the Jerusalem Post and an internationally recognized authority, Yaakov Katz, who was my guest 2 weeks ago when the situation here in Israel was very, very different. Yaakov shared his assessment of how Israel and the IDF have fared over the past 10 days of battle with Iran, the significance of the United States bombing Fordo and other nuclear sites rather than Israel doing it alone, the likelihood that these strikes succeeded, and what success means in this context, how the war against Iran might impact the war against Hamas and the return of the hostages, what the best and worst case scenarios are likely to be after American involvement, the prospect and dangers of regime change in Iran, why President Trump acted now rather than waiting 2 weeks as he had previously suggested, how Israel and Iran can avoid a war of attrition, the degree to which Prime Minister Netanyahu deserves credit for Israel's recent successes, and more. This episode will help us cut through the punditry and partisan claims in order to understand what's really going on and what's likely to happen next. We'll get to our conversation in a moment. First, remember to subscribe to the Orthodox Conundrum podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Please rate it and write a review. Continue the conversation on Facebook by joining the Orthodox Conundrum discussion group. Subscribe to my Substack, Orthodox Conundrum Commentary. Check out the link in the description of this podcast to get your free subscription today. Finally, in 2025, the best way to promote your organization, your business, or yourself is to create a high-quality podcast, and JCH Podcast Productions can help you make that happen. Whether you want to learn how to start your own podcast or want to improve the podcast you already produce, we will make it happen. Write to us at aliza@jewishcoffeehouse.com. That's ALIZA @jewishcoffeehouse.com, and let's get started with your high-quality, memorable, and effective podcast. Yaakov Katz is an Israeli-American author and journalist and a senior fellow at the Jewish People Policy Institute in Jerusalem. Between 2016 and 2023, Yaakov was editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post, where he continues to write a popular weekly column. Yaakov also writes a regular column for Newsweek and the Jewish Chronicle. He's the host of the JPPI Weekly Podcast and appears regularly on CNN and BBC as an analyst on Israel affairs. Yaakov is the author of 3 books: Shadow Strike, Inside Israel's Secret Mission to Eliminate Syrian Nuclear Power, Weapon Wizards, How Israel Became a High-Tech Military Superpower, and Israel versus Iran, The Shadow War. His next book, titled While Israel Slept, is scheduled for publication by St. Martin's Press in the fall of 2025. Prior to taking up the role of editor-in-chief, Yaakov served for 2 years as a senior policy advisor to Naftali Bennett during his tenure as Israel's Minister of Economy and Minister of Diaspora Affairs. In 2013, Yaakov was one of 12 international fellows to spend a year at the Nyman Foundation for Journalism at Harvard University. Originally from Chicago, Yaakov has a law degree from Bar Ilan University and lives in Jerusalem with his wife Chaya and their 4 children. Yaakov Katz, welcome back to the Orthodox Conundrum podcast for this special episode. I appreciate you joining me today.
Good to be with you, Rabbi Kahn.
Let's open up with a broad but important question. How do you assess the success of Israel's fight against Iran as we stand here on the 10th day, Sunday, of direct hostilities? I say direct because there have been hostilities going on for 20 months with Iranian proxies. This is direct warfare between the two countries.
You know, up until this morning and until the U.S. got involved and did what they did with the B-2 bombers taking out Fordow and further hitting Natanz and Isfahan, I would have said that Israel had been doing a quite effective job, but needed to be split into 3 different categories. Category number 1 was the air defense systems, was opening up Iran's skies and creating basically aerial superiority, but even more so aerial sovereignty over Iran. That had been basically mission accomplished. Israel today is able to fly as it wants, where it wants, how it wants over Iran. Still some risk, but nothing like there was in the past. The second category was the ballistic missiles. Not only the missiles themselves, but a bigger focus on launchers. You have to figure that you have about 1 launcher for every 10 missiles. So Israel went into this with about 300 and so launchers and another 3,000 missiles. Israel has been able to degrade the missile stockpiles. And according to the recent reports that we've heard from the IDF, about half of the launchers have been destroyed. That is quite significant. And that explains why, while Iran is still able to fire missiles into Israel, as we saw even just this morning, and cause extensive damage, it is not the barrages that they would have liked to. We're not seeing 50 missiles at a time. We're not seeing 100 missiles at a time. We're seeing 20, 30, very different. And it shows the limitations that currently exist on Iran. But then when we get to the third category, and this is the nuclear program. So Israel was able to cause damage. It was able to take out scientists, and that it did in the opening salvo, of course, with the decapitation of the military leadership. It was able to attack Natanz. Unclear, though, exactly what damage Israel caused to Natanz, because we don't see what happens underground. We just see what's above ground. But there are reports also from the IAEA, the UN's nuclear watchdog, that Israel was able to paralyze the facility by also taking out not only infrastructure and bombing, of course, what's above ground, and also some bunker busters that penetrated below ground. But the bottom, the deepest halls or chambers of Natanz, where they have their centrifuges, did Israel's bombs penetrate or not? What we do know from the IAEA is the belief that Israel, by bombing the electrical power plant that feeds the centrifuges, they probably also caused some damage to the centrifuges themselves. But again, we didn't know exactly what the extent. The facility Parchin, a key facility where some of the weapons development had been done, apparently obliterated. Arak, a heavy water facility and reactor not in use, but one day could be in use. That would be made to refine. That would be used to refine plutonium. Another track for fissionable material if Iran was supposed to or was to think to go down that route one day. Also destroyed. And Isfahan, which is the uranium conversion plant. It's where you take raw uranium, convert it into gas, feed it to the centrifuges, get the gas back, and eventually turn the gas into the uranium metal, what you would require for a nuclear weapon. Heavily damaged, again, unclear to what extent exactly. And of course, Fordow, which Israel was waiting to see what the Americans would do. Now, after the American bombing early this morning or late last night, Washington time, this is a different ballgame. We don't, again, know what's happening below ground. I've seen satellite footage that has now come out from Fordow. You see nothing, no real change on the topography above ground. You do see 2 holes in the mountain where it looks like these 12 GBU 57 MOP massive ordnance penetrators penetrated the mountain and went into Fordow. But if they were successful, inside that mountain, there's probably nothing left at the moment. They also dropped 2 MOPs on the Natanz facility. So If we had any questions about the penetration of those bottom chambers, I think those have been put to rest. And they also attacked Isfahan, not underground, with Tomahawk missiles and other munitions. So, all in all, this was, I would say, the penultimate bombing of nuclear facilities that we could imagine.
What do you mean penultimate?
I mean, like this is the what America has done here is really put to bed potentially the entire nuclear program. But will Iran rebuild? It's possible, and therefore, it's definitely a key piece of what's happening. But this is not what's going to stop them, and that's always important to keep in mind. So they've been destroyed, but we have has the will of Iran to pursue a bomb been broken? That we don't yet know, and that is something to really ensure success. That is going to be the real key here.
Okay, well, you mentioned now that assuming that it actually did destroy Fordo's underground facility, do you know what the chances are that something significant and usable remains there, or is it very likely that it's basically gone at this point?
No, I look, it's probably gone. Again, we don't yet know, and it will probably take time for us to get the post-strike analysis of exactly what happens. The U.S. Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dan Kane, have briefed the media this morning in U.S. time, so our afternoon in Israel, and did say that their assessment is that the strike was a complete success. So Iran's facilities are now destroyed. But I do, again, I don't want to rain on the party, but I do think that we always have to keep in mind is that Iran still has the data, the knowledge, the expertise. And if they decide to rebuild, they will be able to. Now, we might be able to do this again and again and again, but at some point you probably won't be able to. And at some point also, I was explaining to someone this morning, I think, just in my opinion, this isn't the end of the Trump administration. This is the beginning of his term in office. He's only half a year in. So there are 3.5 years left to Trump's term in office. And therefore, that will have an impact on the Iranians when they calculate what their next step would be.
Now, what do you think, Yaakov, the significance is that the United States bombed the Iranian nuclear sites rather than leaving it to Israel to accomplish it? And remember, Prime Minister Netanyahu has said, if necessary, we could do this ourselves. Why then, if that is true, does it matter that Trump took this step?
Well, I mean, look, Israel went into this thinking to itself on June 13th, there is a window of opportunity to strike at Iran's nuclear program. The window was the result of a number of factors. Factor number one was the weakening of the axes of evil of Iran throughout the region. The fact that Hezbollah was weakened and pushed back. And we've even seen in recent days how the Hezbollah operatives and leadership has said, look, we're not getting involved, right? This is not, we don't want to be a part of this. Hamas is a shadow of what it was in the past. And while it still holds hostages and still has some control over Gaza, it can't attack the Israeli home front. Assad's regime and his army are gone. They're nothing like they used to be. And Iran itself was exposed because of previous exchanges of blows between Israel and Iran in April and October of 2024. So that was the massive change. Israel knew it could do this with the minimum price to be paid possible. And we see that there is a price, right? When we attack, we cause damage. When they attack, they also are able to cause damage, even with our superior missile defense systems. So that was the window of opportunity to an extent. But I think that when Israel went into this, it said, okay, I have to take advantage of this window. I have to try to cause as much damage as I can, knowing that my capabilities are limited. And, the strategy and the plan that was on the table was decapitate military, take out nuclear scientists is another way to undermine the program. Take out facilities as much as possible to weaken the program, cause as much damage as possible. But do that with eyes wide open. Israel was not here. This is very different than Osirak in 81 or Al Kibar in 2007. Those were single facilities that once they were destroyed, you had to worry about a retaliation, but you knew you dealt with the nuclear program. In this case, we know that we can cause damage, but we don't know that we can deal with the nuclear program. With the American strike and their involvement, Israel can now pretty much say they have been set back to a significant period of time. So if it was Israel alone, I've heard estimates anywhere from 6 months to a year. With the Americans now, we're talking about several years, even if they were to try to rebuild at the greatest speed possible. And let's not forget, Scott, this costs a lot of money. This is not something that just happens overnight. Natanz was built over years. Fordo was hidden, was revealed to the world in 2009, had been built over a period of years. These aren't buildings you just build one day and, decide to do it. You do it secretly, you do it quietly, you do it with a lot of resources. You try to mask it. And this is really sophisticated technology and infrastructure. It costs a lot of money.
Let me ask you, Yaakov, what do you think the reason is that President Trump acted now after seemingly saying that he would give it up to a couple of weeks? Was this another game designed to distract the Iranians, as Israel didn't lead up to the start of the war? Or is there something specific that took place such that he decided to act last night?
I think that Donald Trump, and my read, and just from the bit I'm hearing from people involved, is that he did debate what to do. There was a question. I think we all know that within the Republican Party today, there is division on issues like this. I don't think it's a secret that his own vice president was not a fan is not an interventionist, is what we could call potentially an isolationist. J.D. Vance has come on board and tweeted a number of times in defense of whatever the president was going to decide to do, but never hid his resistance, let's call it, to these types of moves. We know that
if he were president, this would not have happened. I think it's
I think so
clear.
too, and 100%. I think that we also know that there are isolationists within the Pentagon and within the State Department, and Tulsi Gabbard, the director of national intelligence, who was not in the Situation Room overnight in Washington, which was very was very clear to see. And well, I wouldn't be surprised if she's out of her job in the near future. But and also within the pundits, whether it's Tucker Carlson or Steve Bannon or other people who are affiliated and close to Trump, but are very much aligned against this. So we know that there was real reason for the debate, and there was real reason to consider. But I also think, and I was reading a cute article about this in the New York Times, the 2 weeks is a figure of speech that he uses often. He's used it in the past when talking about, Leo, I'll see you in 2 weeks, whether it was on tax legislation or trade deals or Russia, Ukraine. So it's like it's a unit of time that he does throw out. It's his go-to unit of time. I could say to you, Scott, I'll get back to you in half an hour. Trump will say, I'll get back to you in 2 weeks. That's number one. But number two is, I do think there was a lot of subterfuge. I think there was a lot of deception. And I think we saw that in the run-up to Israel's attack, where Trump kept on saying, I'm optimistic, a deal is possible. And we now know that in the days leading up to that, Israel and America were coordinated, and Trump knew that this was coming, but he still feigned optimism to try to help keep the Iranians asleep. And this is probably what that was as well. He was trying to keep them off their guard and make them believe that there was time and time was on their side, when in reality, they weren't. And by the way, even the B-2 bombers, in today's world, it's very difficult to fly an aircraft without somebody knowing about it. There is open source intelligence, and there's flight trackers. And yesterday, a number of B-2 bombers took off from Missouri in the United States and flew west towards the Pacific, and then started to cross the Pacific. Everyone thought that those were the B-2 bombers that were being put into position in the Indian Ocean for a potential attack against Iran's nuclear facilities, when in reality, there were a number of other B-2 bombers that were actually flying east. And those B-2 bombers, those 6 of them or 7 of them, were the ones who were actually used in this airstrike.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about how this might affect the war against Hamas in Gaza. Do you think it could have an appreciable effect, or is it really not related?
I think it's connected, maybe not directly, but definitely indirectly. Iran is the great sponsor of Hamas, is the great supporter of Hamas, not just with financial support and weapons support, but also with overall, the ideological umbrella and creating that alliance throughout the region of the radical Islamic groups. To have a weakened Iran, a distracted Iran, makes Hamas all the more isolated in Gaza. So I think that definitely gives me some optimism that it opens up the door for what could potentially be a better deal, or a deal at the very least, for Israel to get back the 20 remaining hostages who are alive. But the other thing that gives me some hope is just today, a few hours ago, Israel announced that it retrieved the bodies of 3 hostages from Gaza. And even on a day like this, when you would understand that Israel is distracted and preoccupied and busy with so many other things, that we're still so hyper focused on Gaza. And apparently this operation, we don't know yet the exact details, but the Shin Bet said they had to use special capabilities, whatever that might mean, does show me that this is still being taken very seriously, is still extremely important, and at the core and focus of the defense establishment here in Israel.
Okay, let's talk about the realistic best and worst case scenarios that result from the events of the past 12 hours. In other words, in the ultimately realistic scenario that things would go right or they go wrong, what are those 2 options, do you think?
We're talking about Iran specifically.
Specifically about Iran.
I mean, look, in the good world, or the best case scenario, what we're looking at is the Iranian regime. And again, I go back to what I said before. This is destroying metal, concrete, and centrifuges is super important, but that is just a setback. If they want to rebuild, they can. Will the American involvement take away the will and the desire to continue on this path of a bomb? That's going to be the big question. I think that Israel alone might not have removed that will. I think the American involvement and the fact that Trump is going to be around for another few years will give the Iranians pause to really reconsider whether this is a right or correct investment on their part. So in the best case scenario, what has happened now, there might be some still continued exchange of blows between Israel and Iran, ballistic missiles, etc. But from the nuclear perspective, we have the opportunity to really be in a much better place. We will have to all be vigilant and watch very carefully to see that they're not trying to build a bomb in a basement and do it very secretly. But we're definitely in a better place. A bad case scenario, I think, is 3. One is the Iranians say, we don't care about this. We're racing towards the bomb. And whatever you've destroyed, great, but we still have some capability somewhere with some centrifuges in some office building that no one knows about, with the ability to just make one bomb. And we're going to do it, and we're going to test it, and we're going to declare ourselves a nuclear state, and that will change the dynamic. The second possibility that would make a bad scenario is that the Iranians attack U.S. assets in the region, whether it's U.S. allies like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, or Bahrain, their oil refineries, their main population centers, or actually attack U.S. bases. In that case, America will likely respond, and we've seen already promises to that extent by the president and by the Secretary of Defense. And that will lead to a further escalation. Now, I think the Iranians would be making a tragic mistake from their perspective if they were to do that, but, let's see. From the Israeli perspective, I think a bad scenario would be a war of attrition, right? Trump's not going to stick around for the long haul here. This was clear. It was in, out. It was very precise. It was very focused on what they did. They could have just done Fordo. I think they were smart to do Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan, because if you're already going after Fordo, you might as well take out the rest of them and make sure it's game over for now. But they're not going to stick around, and if Israel does start to come under one missile attack a week, like what we saw with the Houthis as an example, that would be bad for Israel. That would be bad for the economy here. It would be bad for tourism. It would be bad for commercial air industry. It'd be bad for our kids who go to school, for businesses. It just wouldn't be good. And I hope that we won't find ourselves in that scenario.
Well, when you speak about a war of attrition, that makes me wonder about what the possible off ramp might be in not a best or worst case scenario, but in a likely scenario. And the reason I asked this is I heard on Friday the Europeans were negotiating, I think Britain, France, and Germany, they were negotiating with Iran to put an end to its nuclear program on some level. And the Iranians, they negotiate in such a way, even when they're completely under attack and being completely wiped out militarily, they negotiate from a position of strength, much like Hamas does. They pretend that they're an equal partner here and we're both sort of on the same level when it's like you're being destroyed, but you say, that's absolutely not acceptable. No, we have to have the right. And I notice that is a common way that perhaps some of these Islamic fundamentalist regimes act, as if they're winning in their negotiations, which can be very frustrating. So how is it possible, realistically, that this could come to an end, that Israel could find an off-ramp or Iran can find an off-ramp, given that Iran seems to not be willing to say anything whatsoever in terms of negotiations, negotiating themselves out of enrichment?
No, well, first of all, Scott, you're 100% right, is that they've always come to the negotiating table as if they had the upper hand. We saw that in the JCPOA that Barack Obama reached. We saw that when Joe Biden returned well, not returned, was elected president and took up the Oval in 2021. He really wanted to go back to the JCPOA. And it was the Iranians who said no. And America found itself, at least under Biden, without really any other options for that matter. So I think that this changes that dynamic, and this does have the potential to show the Iranians that they don't have the upper hand, that they are actually the underdog in this little battle now of what's going to happen. But I think that for Israel, the real definition of success is going to be, and this is what that off ramp could be, a new deal, a deal that, like I said, let's differentiate between infrastructure and will desire. The infrastructure is now destroyed. The will desire, we don't yet know. And if there is a deal in place that can take away the will or say to the Iranians, listen, this was never about a civilian program. Besimcha, bevakasha, go for it. Have your civilian program. For example, the nuclear reactor at Bushehr has not been touched because that really genuinely is a civilian nuclear energy program, right? So have Bushehr, have what you want. You just don't need centrifuges. You don't need uranium enrichment. And if you look at the focus of the targets, Israel's not bombing a nuclear, the Bushehr reactor. By the way, in 2007, when Israel bombed Syria's nuclear reactor, Syria had a Chinese-made research reactor in Damascus. Israel didn't bomb the Chinese-made research reactor because that's clearly a civilian entity. So have your civilian energy program, but you're not allowed to have anything that has to do with enrichment of uranium and could lead to a weapons program. If the Iranians are willing to come into a deal and say, no problem, we accept that with the right safeguards, with the IAEA, I would actually urge for American inspectors, because that's a level a little higher, this would be a good scenario and a good reality for Israel.
Okay, Yaakov, I have two more questions for you. The first one is the prospect of regime change in Iran. Does Israel actually want that, or would Israel be afraid of what might replace it? Because I've been thinking that although it could be good, we could get another regime which is just as bad. And of course, the enemy you know is better than the enemy you don't know because you have intelligence. So what would you say Israel's endgame is vis-a-vis that? What do they really want?
It's a question that I don't think we know fully yet what the answer is to what the Israeli leadership is seeking here. There have been indications that Israel does have some ambitions to try and weaken the regime to the point that it will be toppled. We've seen Israel's defense minister, Israel Katz, no relation to those who might be wondering.
Such an unusual last name.
Yes, who has publicly said that he has ordered and instructed the IDF to target different targets that would weaken and undermine the regime. So that is definitely an attempt to try to topple Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and his rule over Iran. But I think that what will happen in the next 24 to 48 hours will determine largely for us whether that's the direction or whether we are now done. There is an argument to be made that this is over, right? Israel went into this saying the objective is to cripple Iran's nuclear program, also to undermine their ballistic missile capabilities, to open up the air defenses, etc. But all that has pretty much been achieved. And therefore, the question is, what are we continuing to do? And if Israel does continue to attack in Iran, then those attacks would be against civilian, or not necessarily civilian, but even military regime targets. That would lead to maybe the understanding that this now has a different mission. My word of caution here is I think we should just be a little humble and modest with what we can achieve. We are very powerful, and we have seen the power of the Israeli military and our intelligence services over the last 10 days now, almost. We've seen the great alliance that has now been brought to new heights between Israel and the United States just this morning. But we are a country of 10 million people, and they are a country of 90 million about. They're 9 times our size. We're a country that is about, I think, 75 times smaller in land mass than Iran. So just to give the idea, creating aerial superiority is incredible. To manipulate and engineer a toppling of the regime and a replacement with somebody who's better is going to be really complicated. We don't have good experience with it from Lebanon. The Americans definitely don't have good experience with it from Iraq and Afghanistan. This is something for the Iranian people to do on their own and by themselves. I hope and pray that what has been done serves them, like almost like in basketball, an alley-oop, as it's called, right, or whatever it is, that the ball is now in the air. All they got to do is take it and slam dunk it. That maybe they're able to do that, but I don't minimize the great challenge in achieving something like this. Even if the Iranian people were to take to the streets now, it would be dangerous for them, and therefore, I'm not sure that it's something that we should, try out and put our hand to.
Got it. Could you briefly evaluate Prime Minister Netanyahu's performance over the past 10 days? You and I have both been very critical of the Prime Minister, but I think most people would say that he has done a pretty good job regarding Iran.
I think that Netanyahu, since definitely September of last year, when he took the decision to eliminate Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah, to carry out the beeper attack against Hezbollah, and from what I know, was against great resistance within the defense establishment in Israel, is what paved the way to the decision that was taken on June 13th to go bomb Iran's nuclear facilities, has shown exemplary leadership, and has also shown that he has learned the lessons of October 7th. The greatest lesson from October 7th, at least in my opinion, and I think this is pretty much accepted, is that when an enemy builds up capabilities and amasses arms, trains with them, and openly declares, I'm coming to kill you, the Jewish people, we should take them seriously. And unfortunately, up until October 7th, the same Netanyahu enacted and adopted wrong policies on that. He believed he could figuratively kick the can down the road. He believed that he could give suitcases of cash and pay off Hamas. And he believed that that would work. So while he failed miserably and should be held accountable for that, he's the man responsible. He, by attacking now in Iran, he shows that he's learned those lessons. We can't wait any longer. We can't allow them to get to the point where they will have a sword up against our neck. I've heard people say to me, but they're not yet building the bomb. They're only 3 years away. I mean, what do we want to wait for them to be connecting the red wire and the blue wire and then to act? That will be too late. We wanted them to have 10,000 ballistic missiles to threaten us with. Look at what they're able to do with just 3,000. So I'm glad that Netanyahu has shown that he has learned the lesson. But what I'm most impressed with is how he has been able to forge this amazing alliance with Donald Trump. Not only get the tacit approval to an extent from Trump to carry out the strike that Israel did on its own on June 13th, but to then bring the president to the understanding that it was the right move for America to enter into the fray and to launch the B-2 bombers with the GBU-57s. Does this make up or cover up for what Netanyahu has done until now? No, because it's not a zero-sum game. I just wrote to a journalist. I responded to a tweet. Us people, we get caught up in ourselves sometimes. But there was a well-known journalist on Channel 13, one of the greatest critics of Netanyahu, who said, someone praised Ron Dermer, the strategic affairs minister, who really, if Netanyahu was one of the architects of the relationship now with the Americans, Dermer was definitely there hand in hand and probably can claim just as much credit as Bibi himself. And someone was saying that, and this journalist said, well, no, Dermer's a failure. He's failed with everything he's done because he's in charge of the hostages and he's failed. And I wrote back to the guy, I said, journalistic integrity is the ability to look at things and see the complexity. It's not always black and white. It's not always a zero-sum game. It's not always 1 or 0. It can be, he's made mistakes. He's a faulty guy. He's flawed. He should leave office even. I have no problem saying that. But I look at what's happened, like you said, Scott, over the last 10 days. And I say, wow, thank God that we had Netanyahu here to lead us through this period. They might contradict one another, but that's the complexity of being a Jewish person.
Well, Yaakov, I appreciate that.
You know what it is? It's the Orthodox conundrum. That's what it is.
Okay, well, you heard it here first. Yaakov, I really appreciate it. I know that now you must be extremely busy, so your time is very valuable, and I appreciate your talking to me and to my listeners. One final point, which is that I have to thank you because, as you know, your wife Chaya set up my daughter Meira with Ido Dekan of Jerusalem, and they got engaged on Friday. So thank you very, very much. We have a lot of reasons
Mazel
to
tov
to
you and the whole family. Amen. My wife, I had nothing to do with it except for being married to Chaya.
I still appreciate it. Thank you for joining me. As our news feeds flip between missile alerts and moments of triumph, we find ourselves, as we so often do, reaching for Tehillim. But have you ever wondered what makes Tehillim so special? We've all been told that they're holy, that they have some kind of unique power, that they were written with divine inspiration. But why? What is it about these words that has made them a cornerstone of Judaism for thousands of years? That's the question the podcast Tehillim Unveiled sets out to answer. Each episode takes one of the most familiar chapters and unpeels it layer by layer to reveal its beauty, structure, emotions, and timeless meaning. If you're looking for a good place to start, check out their episode on Tehillim 20, Kaf, which is especially relevant right now. Tehillim Unveiled. The link is in the description of this podcast. Subscribe to the Orthodox Conundrum podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and please rate it and write a review. Please visit jewishcoffeehouse.com for other episodes of the Orthodox Conundrum, as well as many other great podcasts, including Intimate Judaism, The Maimonides Minute, Chochmat Nashim, The Francisca Show, and Let My People Eat. I'd appreciate it if you go to Apple Podcasts and rate and review the Orthodox Conundrum. It takes literally 2 minutes. It's just giving a certain number of stars and writing 1 or 2 sentences. Please like the Orthodox Conundrum podcast on Facebook and join our growing Facebook group, the Orthodox Conundrum Discussion Group, where you can feel free to discuss issues in Orthodoxy in an honest and friendly environment. Finally, do you have a message that needs to get out? Do you want to promote your business, your organization, or your cause? The best way is by producing a podcast, and Jewish Coffee House can make it happen. I have experience producing hundreds of podcasts, both for myself and for satisfied clients. Whether you want to learn everything you need in one day, or relax and record and let me do the heavy lifting, Jewish Coffee House Productions will work with you to make it happen and make it even better than you imagined. Let me help you today. Write to me at scott@jewishcoffeehouse.com or go to jewishcoffeehouse.com, click on Productions, and sign up for a free consultation. Make your voice heard, promote your cause, sell your product, and engage an audience now. I'm Scott Kahn. This has been the Orthodox Conundrum on jewishcoffeehouse.com.